To niche or not to niche? That is the question for agencies, right? Well, what if we're missing part of the question? Gaby and Mike Grinberg founded their agency Proofpoint Marketing in 2016, but they hit a pivotal moment in their agency life in 2020 when the pandemic shook the world and their agency. Their pipeline shrunk, deals stalled out, and their sales process suddenly started to feel more friction-filled. It was then they asked themselves not whether they should niche down, but how. Since that time, they've pivoted their agency's positioning not to be tied to the typical channel plus industry niche model many agencies choose when they do choose to niche down, but one centered on their strategic narrative. In this conversation, we talk about what drove them to that decision, what it's meant for their agency's growth, and what they do differently in the years that have followed. All right, let's get into our very first conversation with a husband and wife duo of agency owners on this show to hear the different path they've chosen for their agency life.
Things were going pretty well. We were growing and, revenue was growing, all this kind of fun stuff. And then pandemic hit, as everybody remembers still. And things got a lot harder, not surprisingly. It wasn't just marketing was harder, business was harder, yes, and yes. But the sales conversations themselves were a lot more difficult. They were more strained. There was a lot more questions. There's more comparison happening. How are you different from this? Or why do you cost more for this than, my other partner? All these kinds of things happening. And that's where it just became absolutely clear. Look, we never wanted to be a Me Too agency anyway. That was from the very beginning. Gaby and I talked about that. We want to do things differently internally for sure in terms of culture and things like that. And I'm sure we'll talk about those things. But from a services perspective, we want to do things differently as well. But we never really, we just sort of went at it and we never really took the time to build it. It was sort of business is coming, great, let's just keep doing what we're doing. And then the sales conversations got harder and we just said, okay, we can't just be a Me Too agency. Agencies are vendors, consultants are partners, that kind of thing. So we're a go-to-market consultancy is how we talk about ourselves now. We kind of thought about, what are the ways to niche down? We can go industry, we can go service line, we can go a combination of those, or we can do something different. And initially we kind of looked at, I worked for a number of agencies prior, Gaby worked for a few before, and we sort of thought, how did they get to where they were? And it was it doesn't matter, because they built up the reputation 10 years ago. You can't do what they did then. And you can't do what they're doing now because they no longer need to do some of these things. They already have a reputation to stand on. We don't yet. So all those factors went into deciding, okay, we're not going to do the channel plus industry thing because that's still a commodity. You're still being compared to, how are you different from this other agency that does channel plus industry, like PPC for retail companies, for example, or whatever. So we went a very different approach, and all these things that were swirling around in my mind and Gaby's mind in terms of how relationships are a core component of business and all that is we pretty much set up to then redefine what is relationship marketing, because the category got created, if you will, back in 2013, and pretty much it never really evolved since then. And it was just, you got to be on social because that's when social networks were just starting to be prominent, right? So we took that approach as, okay, how do we do that? How do we redefine this? And we netted out with what we call relationship-led growth. And that's the framework that we've now put out and that's out there. And it has a specific focus for certain types of businesses. So we did niche down to a certain extent, but it's business type rather than industry. And we can get into that if you want. I don't want to bore you with too many details unless you want to go there. So
Every conversation with you, Mike, is not boring. I will say that. But, to recap there, as the pandemic hit, you're feeling your potential clients go through your proposals more with a fine-tooth comb. You're getting questions you didn't get before. You're getting more friction in the sales process that really centers around this comparison. So what are we going to do about this? Are we just going to try and fill the funnel with more, or are we going to try and focus and fill our funnel with the right types of folks where there's going to be less friction? Okay, niching down could be one thing. If we went the channel plus industry, your hunch, so to speak, was if we go that route, it's going to be more of the same. There's going to be more of this comparison. Well, you do this and the line item piece. Gaby, I want to hear, your 2 cents as well as you hear Mike kind of replay that point in your journey together, especially as a husband and wife couple leading the agency. What was in your mind as you guys were making this decision to niche down and niche down around a go-to-market strategy, around what eventually became your strategic narrative? Next, I do want to get into what is that? How did you define it? How has that changed the agency? But don't want to move there too quickly. So Gaby, let's get your 2 cents as well.
Well, I mean, as we all know, the pandemic was a game changer for every area of business and life and politics and the world and everybody. And we all know that the way that people conduct business, the way that people want to be approached in business had already been sort of changing a little bit prior to the pandemic. And then pandemic hit and it was like, okay, all stops are pulled out. So we knew that we, as Mike said earlier, we had been in a number of agencies in our career. We had worked with agencies when we were client side, and we knew that the way that those agencies worked and operated and built their models was not going to cut it in today's world. And so, similar to what Mike is saying, like we recognized very quickly that, okay, we need to differentiate. We need to stand out in a crowded market. We need to offer something different that our competitors don't offer or don't have. And we need to talk about what we do in a unique way. And that's really where, again, this idea of building a strategic narrative came into play. And I will just say for the record, at the risk of sounding ignorant, I had no idea what a strategic narrative was at the time. I had seen Andy Raskin on LinkedIn. I had seen him talking about it. I thought, well, this is just for the, the SaaS people out there. This is just for the SaaS unicorns. This is just for, the big multi-billion-dollar companies. They have to do this. What I didn't realize is that actually everybody needs to do this. If you're in business today, you need a strategic narrative. You need a unique point of view. Otherwise, you're just going to end up being a Me Too company. And when it comes to marketing agencies, there are a lot of them out there. Probably 500,000 in the United States alone, if not more. Maybe that number is even conservative, considering a lot of the freelancers and small consulting groups, and then the large conglomerates and everyone in between. Let's not even talk about what's happening outside the US, because there's a million and other marketing and marketing adjacent service providers out there. So we knew very quickly that we needed to differentiate. And that's really where Mike, and this is really where he gets all the credit, I must say, is that he really became the architect of what our strategic narrative is and our unique POV. The big part of this undertaking was talking to customers. I mean, you hear this everywhere. It's an echo chamber on LinkedIn. You have to talk to customers, and there's a good reason for it, because it's incredibly valuable. If you skip that part of talking to customers, then are you really in marketing, right? So Mike did the really laborious and hard work of talking to clients, talking to our current clients, talking to clients that decided not to work with us through the pandemic because they were cutting costs, but we still made the effort to talk to them and add value to them, talking to past clients, talking to people that were in our pipeline at the time. And that's really the foundation of building the strategic narrative, because we learned very very firsthand and very deeply what our clients needed, what they were seeking from a partner, and what initially led them to choose us, or what led them to not choose us, or to move away from working with Proofpoint. And that's where, again, this idea of having a unique narrative, something that resonated with our clients, became imperative, became absolutely necessary, so that we could really build that narrative and really tailor it to the exact ICP that was going to need to hear it.
And so you could continue to grow efficiently, right? It sounds like from what you've both shared, it was imperative to your growth and imperative to efficient growth. I picked that word very specifically because Mike said sales conversations were still happening, but there was more friction. It was tougher. Your sales cycles were getting longer. Maybe your win rates were going down a bit, right? And in so much of agency life, business development is often done by the founders, maybe without a process. And so oftentimes I think other agency owners listening to this can say, I got to a point where I realized like all of a sudden the pipeline was dried up because the foundation of business development and managing that pipeline maybe isn't as tight as it is even for some of our clients on the agency side. So it can sneak up on us. Mike, I want to hear from you a little bit, digging into, as Gaby said, the laborious task of developing this strategic narrative. I don't want to go too deep into, what is relationship-led growth and that sort of stuff in the category that you guys are trying to own and your strategic narrative. But as Gaby said, it's not a stupid question to ask, what is a strategic narrative? What is your example of one? How does POV play into that? Or are they synonymous? So give us, the minute or so on what your strategic narrative is so that we can focus the rest of the conversation on how did you develop it? How does it change the way you interact with clients? So that other agencies, they're going to have a different strategic narrative, but they can learn from your story to build their own.
So I'll give you the 30-second version of it, and then we can jump into a couple, I think, core things that I think are important to point out to others. So really what we're talking about is, first of all, I think it's important to identify who we're doing it for. So our core audience is what we call technical professional services. So it's broad in the sense it could be cybersecurity, it could be IT, it could be environmental consulting, it could be biotech consulting, it could be engineering firms, it could be architecture firms. Some sort of technical niche consulting or service-based business. They usually have a very specific set of problems. It's industry agnostic, what we found. So that's number one, is you need to understand who you're doing it for. The offer to them generally is this. It's, hey, you have grown your business to a certain point through relationships already. Every single business like that grows through relationships. At some point, for one reason or another, it could be because they're getting a private equity investment, or they're getting acquired by a private equity firm, or they're trying to get acquired by a private equity firm and they really want to scale growth, and like, okay, well, now we got to grow 25 to 50% year over year for the next 3 to 4 years. We've never done that before. This one-to-one thing, relationship-based thing, no longer works. And their automatic thing to do is go, well, let's just do some SEO, let's do some PPC, let's do this thing and the other, right? Which is not relationship focused at all. Not surprisingly, it doesn't work. Here's a different approach, right? The approach is, don't forget about the thing that got you to where you are. Figure out a way to scale it instead. And along with that, sort of the villain to a certain extent in the equation is revenue marketing, because a lot of these companies, if they do approach something, they often go, oh, well, we got to do the revenue marketing thing. We got to build their funnel, do this, that, and the other, which again turns their relationship-focused business into a transactional type environment. So that's the narrative. Okay. Probably the main thing I really want to point out is a narrative is not, it's not a gimmick. It is not a tactic. It is not even a marketing strategy. It's not a way to manipulate somebody. It has to be core to your business, and you have to actually believe that what you're doing is the right thing for the people you're doing it for. I've seen too many people go about it the wrong way. It's like, oh, well, my sales aren't working, so I need to niche down and I need to, make up a thing. And they make it up, and lo and behold, maybe it works for a short period of time, but then they can't deliver, and then they fail. Like it has to be built on a tangible thing that actually works. And like it has to be a business strategy first.
And I think that's something we've talked about Andy Raskin here a bit, and obviously given him some kudos for building the conversation around strategic narratives in B2B. I love the way that you guys are saying, hey, it's not just for these big billion-dollar companies. It's not even just for the mid-market SaaS companies. It can apply to agencies as well. And he talks about that it has to be a company strategy. It's not just a marketing thing. It is a company strategy thing. So as you guys started to realize, hey, this is going to be a stronger way for us to niche down. From what I hear you saying, Mike, you identified who's involved, what do we deliver or what do they need? So that kind of leads you to your offer. You identified the villain. What can people rally around that's holding them back from what they do want to accomplish? So those are three of the pieces. How did you go about starting to put those pieces together? Who was involved? Where did you start? Get granular with us of what worked, what didn't, where did you start? How did you structure these calls? All of that sort of stuff.
I want to say one thing before Mike jumps in here. Sorry to cut your thunder, Mike. I do want to underscore, and this is probably something you're going to say, Mike, that it is iterative. The first draft that Mike showed me, I proverbially ripped it up and tore it up, and I said, this is horrible. I don't like it. So I just want to say that it was a very iterative process. And for those people that are thinking about, okay, this is a really great business strategy that I want to implement, know that it is going to be a very iterative process. It's going to require a lot of conversations with key internal stakeholders as well as clients of continually refining that message.
100%. And if I had to do it over again, I'm sure we could do it faster. But back then, the key things were, number one, I completely agree with the concept of it has to come from the top down. So I said, all right, it's not going to come from anybody other than me. I'm going to need feedback. I'm going to need input. I'm going to talk to customers. I'm going to talk to our internal folks. But I have to be the person, because we're not using an external consultant, which, by the way, we knew messaging was an issue for us before this. We used 2 external consultants. They both failed miserably. So at that point, I said, you know what, screw this. And I always had hesitations about it. And it's one of those gut instincts. All right, I should have just trusted that. But anyway, long story short, I knew it had to come from me to start. So that was step one. The other thing is really took a build in public approach. It's hard to formulate a lot of these ideas. Like you said, how do you put all these pieces together? So honestly, what I did was I just started posting about it on LinkedIn. If somebody wants to look back at my content 2 years ago and watch the progression, that's the progression of our narrative to a certain extent. And it was looking at what are people responding to. That was one of the feedback loops. Then I would go, not trusted partners, but trusted sources that I would be willing to go to, hey, I've got my next iteration. Are you willing to listen to my sales pitch for 30 seconds? And give me some feedback. Right? People that were never going to buy from me, most likely, but people whose opinion I trusted that knew the market, things like that. Then at one point, started trialing it with past customers, current customers. Hey, we're working on and we tied it into offering. So, hey, we're looking at repackaging our offerings this way. What do you think? And I used that as an opportunity to give them the new spiel, if you will. And then same with the internal team. So it was a lot of feedback loops, and it was a lot of this iterative process and building in public.
I love that idea of building in public. I think whether you're an agency owner or you're an in-house marketer, you can go off to a dark corner, come out with something, and you assume that you're a smart, successful individual. You probably came out with something smart, which isn't, a terrible assumption, but it can lead us astray. One of the things we say at Teamwork is show your work. Go back to 7th grade when you're doing your math and think about, you got to show your work, not for proving that it's right, but for building in public, as you said there, Mike. So what were some of the things you mentioned that if you were to go back now, you could do it faster?
Something you just said actually made me think about something I would do the same. It's worth pointing out. So at first, I did go into a corner because I do actually think that's required. You collect information. So I talk to customers. And after I did that, I went away. I think I sat at a coffee shop for an entire day. And in my notebook, I pretty much did a mind map. And I started going, okay, what are the core topics? How do these fit? What are my core beliefs already that feed into this? All this kind of stuff. And I mapped it out and started writing some messaging. And there was variations and things like that. That took maybe, a couple hours, let's just say. Then I took that, and the next step was, all right, now let's turn this into more, okay, if I have to build a homepage, what does my homepage flow look like? Then I showed that to Gaby. That was the first feedback loop. So that part I would keep the same. I wouldn't change a thing, because I do think, again, someone's got to own it. In a small organization, that's got to be the CEO in my mind. And you have to go collect the information, go in a corner and build whatever that ugly first draft is. What I would do differently, I would treat it more from a like an agile approach. I would put more specific, like, okay, I'm going to go away for a day. I'm going to do this. I'm going to get a draft. I'm going to do these 3 things to get feedback, which my goal is to get them by X date. Based on that feedback, I'm going to give myself X amount of time. I'm going to rewrite it. We're going to put that live, and I'm going to do that. The problem that we had, it was too loose. So there was continuous feedback with nonstop, and it was hard to really gauge, okay, what is the feedback? When do we go to the next iteration? Right? And I think we took too long in a number of those instances because of that.
The other thing that I would add to that approach is, in terms of what we would have done differently, is had we known, we would have started this way sooner. Had we known as first-time entrepreneurs back in 2017 when we started our business, just how critical this would be to aligning our services, our pricing, our client, our go-to-market approach, our sales motion, and even our culture and our internal brand, our employer brand, had we known just how critical it would be to have this singular beacon of light that says, okay, this is what we are, this is who we are, this is what we stand for. I would have loved to have started this way sooner in the process. We definitely would have been way ahead of the game, even probably through the pandemic. Like most companies, we had a tough time. We had a tough go at it. And I think had we had the foresight to know what this is and how and why it was so critical, that is the one thing that I would have done differently, is done it sooner.
I love that advice. And as the saying goes, hindsight is 20/20. So you guys still get a lot of credit. Mike, I want to come back to you in a second on how this started to play out. You've started to refine the narrative. I think we've given some really good advice to folks on how to get started there. And my natural next question is, how does that impact your sales process, your delivery with clients? But Gaby, maybe we could double tap on what you just said there, how it actually changed the business, because part of what you do is the experience at Proofpoint for both clients and for your internal team. So how did this start to, even in the early days, as you made this decision and went down this route to niche down via your strategic narrative, how you recruit, how you hire, how you onboard, how you reward, how you facilitate your internal culture? Would you mind speaking to that for a bit?
I mean, the short answer of it, Logan, is that it affected everything. It shined a light on everything, on our entire internal process. And you are correct. My role here at Proofpoint is that of client and people experiences. So I oversee every single people touch point. And one of the things that was very important to us from the very beginning of starting Proofpoint was culture. Building a good culture, having a culture that was desirable, that was unique and different from what was out there. We say that we want to break down tired and outdated business norms through our culture and through the people experience at Proofpoint. And we were only getting so far. We had a mission, we had a vision, we had values, but I'll tell you, initially those kind of fell flat. They weren't integrated with our business. It was often so hard to integrate what we wanted the client experience to be with the people experience, because we just didn't have the right pillars in place that married those two things. It's the two sides of the same coin. What you want your clients to experience and what you want your internal team to experience. And they ultimately have to ladder back up to something. And we were finding as business owners that, we talked about culture. We had a pretty good culture. We had people that were bought in and that were aligned, but there was always cracks in the foundation. There was always something that just wasn't strong enough, or a message that wasn't resonating, or an experience that we weren't able to really bring to life. And that's when, when we started focusing on the strategic narrative, that's when we started seeing all these cracks. And we started realizing, okay, this side of the business needs just as much love as this side of the business. And what we need to do is marry this side, which is the people experience, with our go-to-market, with our client experience, with our delivery, with our service offering. Because you really can't have one without the other, And you can even argue that the people experience is even more critical than than your go-to-market and your sales and your client experience creation.
Completely agree. It echoes something in conversation with someone I know. All three of us are friends and fans of Nicole Pereira with Remotish and her advising company now, Culturish. She was talking with me the other day. It's like we have this desire, a good desire to deliver an exceptional client experience. But if the people delivering on those client services aren't having an exceptional experience, then it is going to show. It's two sides to the same coin. It's one has to start and then the other comes. So just wanted to reiterate that, give Nicole a shout out because she's a big advocate for that, just like you are, Gaby. And I love that from both of you. Maybe we could get very tactical here because you and I were talking a couple weeks back, Gaby, and you mentioned this even flowed into the way that we look at SLAs within the organization and changing some language around that actually flowed down from this strategic narrative, your focus on relationships. Maybe for folks, again, they're going to have if they decide to go this route, to niche down with a strategic narrative as opposed to channel plus industry or some other route, it'll look different for them. But I think what you were telling me about the Proofpoint Partnership Pact was something very tactical that people could learn from in their own agency.
Absolutely. Well, it is 99% ready to go. We have just a few small minor touches that we're doing internally, but I will be talking and sharing about the Proofpoint Partnership Pact on LinkedIn very, very soon. And so those that follow me or those that after this conversation want to follow me, please do, because I'm excited to unveil this. When we talk about relationships, it really permeates every part of our business. And one of the most important relationships or beginning of a relationship is when a client signs an SOW with you, when you begin that new client relationship. And oftentimes, here's what happens. You go through all the legalese. There's the MSA, the NDA, and the SOW, and all these other acronyms that you got to put together. And generally speaking, it is a combination of maybe a legal representative, the CEO or CMO or CFO that's reviewing these things, and other internal stakeholders that may not be the day-to-day contact for the account, right? They've got to look at all these documents, but they're not the ones that are actually managing and building the relationship with the marketing agency, with Proofpoint as an example. Prior to doing our strategic narrative and shortly thereafter, that the client experience, the initial client experience is so critical to setting up the team for success in the long run. And like many companies, we were just looking at it as just another step in the process. Okay, you signed on the dotted line and then we begin. What we actually found out, and again, this was through numerous dialogues and phone conversations that me and my team on the experience side had with our clients, is that there's actually quite a few micro steps or micro phases that happen after an SOW is signed. One of which is that legal gets involved or finance gets involved. Another one is that there's inevitably a little bit of a dip in excitement and enthusiasm from the main point of contact. Why? Because it's a lot of money that they're signing, right? And so there's this point in time where us as an agency and on the experience side, we recognize that we really needed to create a really amazing onboarding experience. So for those watching the video, I've pulled up our Proofpoint Partnership Pact, and I want to make a special note about this because generally speaking, after an agency partnership occurs, SOW, you get something called an SLA, Service Level Agreement. And I'll be quite honest with you, Logan, to me that sounds like something you'd get at a used car dealership, not something that you're going to get with a partner, a marketing partnership, something
a strategic partner in business,
partner.
Right?
Exactly. So everything about this document has been scrutinized and reimagined and re-envisioned to better align with our philosophy around relationship building. And that starts with the name of the document itself. We were very deliberate to call it a partnership pact. Because at the end of the day, what we want our clients to recognize is this is a partnership. And we were finding, again, prior to building out our strategic narrative, that our clients were reticent and reluctant to to giving us access and really becoming a partner with us. They were looking at it in a very tired and outdated way of doing business with a marketing partner. And because we wanted to change those norms and to change the way that people approach marketing, we realized that it really does have to be a partnership. So we start with that here. And one of the things that we do that is not necessarily revolutionary, but it is something really unique and again follows in line with our narrative, is that we actually take photos of the real people that work at Proofpoint. We do not use one drop of stock photography, mostly because I hate stock photography and I hate having to pay for ugly images, but also because as a fully remote company, we want our clients to know that these are the people that actually you're going to work with, and that we work together and we know each other and we have deep relationships. And then getting back to what I was saying earlier, which is around the client onboarding, we had identified through numerous conversations with clients and quite frankly through making this mistake a number of times, that there needs to be a better and more unique onboarding experience for clients. And so we broke down our onboarding experience into 7 unique steps. And that was, again, a big part of bringing the strategic narrative to life, this idea of building a relationship, and the idea of recognizing that just because somebody signs on the dotted line with us, that's only the beginning of the relationship. That's not the end of the relationship. We also have a very rigorous sales process that is broken down into multiple phases and steps in an effort to build an initial relationship. But that relationship changes significantly when you're in a sales phase versus in a post-sales phase. And we recognize that some of our early relationships with clients were failing because we were failing to make that distinction, and we were failing to provide a really unique experience for clients in that beginning part of the relationship.
So much good stuff there, Gaby. I think, as we mentioned here, if other agency leaders are taking away from this, hey, there's really something to building our strategic narrative. It's going to be something different, but you touch on something even as we get tactical in how that flowed down to your client service and your client experience. What you just said there, we often think that, hey, it's just the beginning of the relationship or the end when they signed on the dotted line. It is an emotional point for our point of contact because, like you said, they've just put a bunch of money on the line. Maybe it's not their individual money, it's the company's, but they're putting their career or at least their current position or their political capital internally on the line by deciding on a certain agency or certain consultancy. So even just that, I wanted to pull that out as a lesson for other agencies to think about. It's just as true for B2B SaaS sales as it is for us as an agency. We can celebrate that big new logo, but we need to remember that's when they're most primed for buyer's remorse. You guys, I don't think would have keyed in on that as much had it not been for the strategic narrative of focusing on relationship and then having that lens to look at everything, our sales process, our client onboarding, our recruiting, all of these things. So Mike, maybe we could go to you on something that Gaby mentioned there. We started out talking about the sales process was feeling different. It was feeling a little bit more comparative, more friction to it. What's it like today out the other side, deciding to niche down, iterating on that process, as Gaby called out so well earlier, and then getting to where it is today? How has it changed the way that you run your sales process, the way that you market your agency?
I mean, it's like night and day, honestly. One thing I want to call out quickly, I think is important, both based on what Gaby said and what you asked me prior in terms of creating the narrative itself. I think it's worth underlining that there's a bit of a chicken and egg kind of thing between culture and narrative. Meaning your narrative is as much based on your culture as your culture is based on your narrative. It's a symbiotic relationship, if you will. And it can't be one without the other, because that, like what you pointed out in terms of, like, we never would have necessarily looked at these things had we not decided to focus on relationships as a core offering. Vice versa, we as a people first and relationship focused organization internally maybe wouldn't have thought about relationships as a core had we not seen that that is how our business was growing itself, right? So it's very meta, symbiotic, whatever. In terms of sales process, because of all of these things, it really is night and day in the sense that the way I like to describe what you want the outcome of a unique point of view and a strategic narrative to be is when it's out there, you know, one or two responses, either, never thought about it that way, or yes, finally somebody's saying what I've been thinking. You want one of those two responses. And once you get that, the sales conversation is completely different. So either if they came to you inbound, let's just say, they would have seen this already. They're already ideally asking for what you have to offer, which is, in our case, relationship-led growth, relationship-based marketing, etc. If it's outbound or we meet somewhere or whatever and I'm talking about it, then as we're talking, I give them that some variation of that pitch. And again, it's one of those, never thought about it that way. And in our case, that's usually what it is, because they're not thinking about, oh, yeah, you're right. I didn't think about the fact that 90% of my business comes from some form of relationship building and referrals. And what I'm doing right now has absolutely nothing to do with that and is making everything transactional. Never thought about it that way. So in a nutshell, that's the big difference. Because then that response now allows you to have you're no longer even having a discovery conversation at that point. You're just having a business conversation about their business. It's because once they've said, never thought about that way, then they're like, well, tell me more. Well, here's some things you should be thinking about, right? I'm telling them what I think. I'm asking them what's going on in their business. It's not that formal, like, well, what budget do you have? And none of this BANT BS and all this kind of stuff. It allows you to put that away.
So good. It's something that we touched on in a previous episode of the show. Bob Ruffalo with Impact, he was mentioning within their agency, they actually focus as much, if not more time on communication and authority-based communication skills within their agency, as much as they do the RevOps, the marketing, the content skills, those sorts of things. Because I think you hit the nail on the head there, Mike. If as an agency, we can get our prospective clients to say that little phrase, however many words it is, I've never thought about it that way. So often as agencies, we get clients and then we try to get them to listen to us. We try to get them to take our advice and they just won't take our advice. So we're not seeing the results. So they're going to churn, right? It's a little bit too late. Once you already have them on board, it starts with when they're seeing your content, when they're coming inbound, when they're in the sales process, because if they say that little phrase, I've never thought about it that way, you have some trust, some rapport, and some authority to speak into their business as a consultant rather than just a vendor of marketing services, as Gabby mentioned earlier. So it comes full circle.
By the way, tying it back to the partnership pact, I think this is an important tactical thing. If somebody is responding in this way of like, never thought about it that way, guess what that means? They've literally never thought about it that way. They're not just automatically going to go like this and start thinking about that way moving forward. So we need to remind them of that every single time we talk to them. We remind, like the partnership act, at some point we jump on the call and we take them through our strategic narrative pitch. It's a much shorter version, but it's a reminder like, hey, if you remember, this is what we're doing and here's why. And this, you, in your business, here's where it fits. And they go, yep. They're no longer saying, well, I never thought about it that way. Now they're going, oh yeah, I told you I never thought about it that way. And I get it. I like that. Mm-hmm. And then the next time we have the kickoff, it's again the same thing, slightly different way, slightly different purpose to it. We're doing it again. When we have a QBR, same thing. I mean, it's this repetitive thing because somebody can't just change their thinking on a dime. It doesn't happen. And most agencies, and we did the same thing. We were just like everybody else at one point. Everybody goes like, oh, well, you hired the expert. Just listen to the expert. Well, it doesn't work that way. Not exactly. Yeah.
That's so good. And it points out something that we mentioned earlier in the conversation, that this is building a strategic narrative and using that as the way that you niche down and differentiate yourself as an agency is not just a gimmick. It's not even just a marketing thing. It is a business strategy that comes down from the top, and then it starts to impact everything that you do. You find different ways to reiterate and repeat it. Who was it that said the CEO's job is actually the chief repeating officer? I think that comes to bear in this conversation as well. Well, Gabby, Mike, this has been fantastic. As we do with every episode of Agency Life, we want to make a few minutes here for our Fast Five. This will be the first time we're doing it with two guests. So we'll start with you on each of the five, Gabby, and get your response, and then Mike's, if that's good with you guys. And then we'll give you the opportunity to give someone a shout out who has impacted your journey in agency life. You guys ready for the Fast Five?
Gabby's always
Couples
first
edition.
and more important.
We're ready for it, Logan.
All right, Gabby, our first of the Fast Five. If someone gave you $10,000 a month, $120K a year right now to better run the agency, no strings attached, how would you use that today?
Two things. One, operations support. We just promoted someone internally to director of agency operations, my direct report, Kristen. She's doing a phenomenal job, but it is a big job and there's a lot to be done. So I would want to support her with some external resources and help on the operations side of the business. And then I would also use a big part of that, maybe 50-50 or 60-40 on support for content creation, because there is no amount of content that is ever enough out there. And I think if we could scale our content and our thought leadership more than what we're doing today, that is where I would spend the money there on those two things.
I love that. Well, we started the Fast Five couples edition here with a money question. So over to you, Mike. You can agree or you can come up with something different. What's your answer on the first of the Fast Five here?
Let's make things interesting. We'll go different. So we actually just not too long ago did a thought exercise with the team. Similar, we said if the agency got a $1 million cash infusion, how would we use it? And one of the things that a group internally came up with, which both Gabby and I actually liked, is in-person events. So we do one for the internal team and one for clients and others. So that would be...
Well, I mean, it could play into Gabby's idea about content creation, because I think in-person events are a great way to build relationships and create more content and strengthen those relationships through content creation.
Yep.
I could get on that for days and days and days. All right, number two of our Fast Five, a little slower Fast Five, but we're getting great stuff because we've got both of you on here, Couples Edition, as we're calling it. Gabby, what are your all-time favorite business books? One or two that would make the top of the list for you?
I don't know if it's my all-time favorite, but it is one that I'm consistently going back to time and time again, and I have it here at my desk. It's called The No BS Small Business Book by Casey Graham. If you've spent any length of time over the past few years on LinkedIn, you've heard of Casey Graham, you know who he is. And it's a very quick read, but by golly, it just illuminates so many fundamentals in business that are worth repeating, and he gives a lot of really just tangible examples and things that are simple and maybe not easy but simple, and things that sometimes as entrepreneurs we tend to focus on the complicated, and he really brings it back down to the simple. So I love this book. It's dog-eared, it's highlighted. This is a good one for me.
I love it. Mike, over to you. Top books that are on your shelf, on your desk, or you go back to.
I'm going to go old school, which is The Effective Executive by Peter Drucker. That's probably the one. I'm not big on reference going back to books and things like that, so that's not really my style. But that one I have gone back to.
I love it. All right. Gabby, what is one mistake you've made in running the agency that you'll never forget? And if this is one you guys want a combo on, I'm open to that, but not to put you on the spot. Leading with you, Gabby. I'll let you take it whichever way you want.
Two mistakes, they kind of go hand in hand. One is when we first started Proofpoint, we did not have a very strong hiring and onboarding process. In fact, it was non-existent. And the first couple of hires that we made were just not the right fits, or the wrong culture fit, or wrong skill set. And it was 110% our fault, because we just did not have that rigor. We did not have the process. We did not have a good experience for hiring or onboarding. Once we made that mistake 1, 2, 3 times, we realized, okay, the mistake is not with these people. The mistake is with us. And since then, we didn't get to it on this call, but I do have to say that I think our hiring and our onboarding process is pretty damn good at this point now. we've solved that problem very quickly after a few mistakes. And then the other mistake, which is similarly related, is trusting your gut when it comes to people. There was a couple of times where we made some hires, or we were too slow to let somebody go from the agency, and that ended up costing us big time. Money, but also team morale, trust with clients, and our own sanity, our own well-being and mental health, because we were dealing with a lot of employee issues that could have been mitigated had we acted sooner, had we trusted our gut. And I like to say that business is, 10% numbers and 90% gut. And at least that's what I believe. Mike might think differently on that, but that's what I believe. And
I think closer to 60-40.
Right. Not trusting your gut when it comes to people, when it comes to hiring, when it comes to making people decisions is, I think, the biggest mistake that I've made, and that I will not be making again in the future. I can tell you that.
Well, I think it goes into what you said there, that oftentimes as agency owners, not thinking about our own sanity and well-being in the decisions that we make. So just pulling that out, previous episode we did with Shauna Knuckles talking about burnout as an agency contributor and an owner. If you want to go deeper on that, scroll back in the feed and check out episode 1. You'll enjoy that. Mike, let's talk about your mistakes, and then we'll round it out with number 4 and 5 here.
I mean, in this case, I'm not going to disagree with Gabby. That's 100% the biggest one we ever made. Quick story is the very first person we hired. We met her for lunch, I believe, for 30 minutes, maybe an hour, gave her a laptop and said, all right, you're onboarded. Here we go. So don't do that.
I really wish you would. You just made me cringe, but it's a true story. That is a true story.
For those just listening to the audio, as soon as Mike said that, Gabby covered her face just immediately, knowing where he was going. Fantastic. Maybe we'll have to have you guys on, or Gabby, to have you drill into that in a future episode, how your hiring and onboarding has really changed and what other agencies can do better other than you're hired, here's a laptop. All right. For the last two, great way to put it, you guys. Gabby, let's do 4 and 5 in order. What do you think is the hardest part of agency life, and what do you think is the best part of agency life? And then Mike, we'll get both of those from you.
Hardest part is people. Best part is people. Simple as that.
Wow. I should have seen that coming from you. That was fantastic. All right, Mike, round us out.
I mean, I can't disagree with that. Honestly, it's the same thing. And whether that's internal people or external with clients, it's same thing. Best and worst part, depending on the day.
All right. Well, as we finish up every episode here on Agency Life, it is about people, like you guys have both reiterated, its relationships. So want to give you an opportunity to give a shout out to someone who has made an impact in your journey. Mike, we'll turn it over to you. We'll let you go first on this one. We'll round it out with you, Gabby.
The person mentor whose advice I consistently come back to all the time, his name is Mark Cohn. He's an entrepreneur from the Minneapolis area. He was our informal advisor at one point, and I also worked for him at a startup prior to that. He was the CEO of that startup, and the lessons learned, and it's the one thing I'll call out that I always come back to, and I've posted in God knows how many comment threads on LinkedIn, is words matter, use them wisely. It's a very simple piece of advice, but the more time I spend in this business and in business in general, it is so important.
Solid advice. And I think that ties into our conversation today of the strategic narrative can be so powerful for you as an agency if you decide to go that route and put in the work. All right, Gabby, who's your shout out today?
Oh God, I just want to preface this and say that I love all the people that touched me, and I have a very hard time of just calling out one or two, because there's so many people that have really positively impacted our journey at Proofpoint and our journey as people and as entrepreneurs. So I just have to say that this is like the hardest question that you've asked me today. I would probably say there's 2 people. One is my dad. He's not on LinkedIn and he doesn't listen to podcasts. Maybe he'll listen to this one. But from a very, very, very early point in my life, he unknowingly showed an example of how to treat people with kindness, how to treat people with respect and with dignity. I was a little girl at the time, and we were at a store, and he was talking to an individual that was mentally impaired. And while everyone else around him was treating this person really roughly and rudely, my dad treated this person with kindness and dignity. And that stuck with me almost 40 years of my life. I'll never forget that moment in my life of treating people with kindness and dignity, whoever they are, wherever they are. That is a big one for me. That has impacted who I am as a person and who I am as a leader. And then I would say another shout out. You mentioned this person on the call today. I know you know her very well. We know her very well, Nicole Pereira. Nicole has been a friend and a mentor and a guide and a Sherpa for us. She's maybe like 3 to 4, maybe 5 years ahead of us in her entrepreneurial journey, maybe a little bit more. And she has treated us as partners and as friends, not as competitors or, people that she has to watch out for, but more people that she wants to look after and look to. And I have really respected her friendship and her guidance as an agency owner. So those are the two people. There are plenty more, but those are the two that have impacted me the most, I would say.
Great story from your dad, and it is timely with our focus on relationships today as your strategic narrative at Proofpoint that you would call out a parental relationship. And two, I just love that mention of Nicole and someone who has an abundance mindset versus a scarcity mindset. As you mentioned earlier in the episode, Gaby, there's a lot of competition. There are a lot of marketing agencies and consultancies, and we can let that drive us into fear, scarcity, bad tactics that are not good for us as agency owners, not good for our teams. But with a shift, whether it's, as we're talking about today, in your business and the way that you run it and the way that you position it with your strategic narrative and the way that you look at the market and you look at the opportunity for your agency, those mental shifts do have ripple effects and they do impact us, our teams, and our clients. I love the advice that you guys gave tactically on how to leverage a strategic narrative. It's got to start at the top. You want to build both in public and in private. It's going to be iterative, and you want to involve your spouse probably, because that was one piece of advice that Mike gave, whether they're your business partner as you guys are or not. So I just want to thank you both for adding so much value in walking us through your journey of building your strategic narrative. I want to encourage everybody listening to this, follow Mike and Gaby Grinberg, Grinberg on LinkedIn. Gaby, Mike, anything else any other places you would recommend folks where people could find either more from you guys or from folks who would be good as far as the strategic narrative and thinking about that for their agency?
I'll jump in first. So we didn't talk about this time around. Maybe we'll get to talk about it on another episode, Logan, which is our culture book. We kind of alluded to the fact that the culture also needed a big overhaul once we did our narrative. So we do actually have our culture book on our website. It is not gated. Anyone can download it. It's also on my LinkedIn page on my featured section, so you could check out the culture book there. The Proofpoint Partnership Pact, for those that are interested, we will be sharing about that and posting that soon on LinkedIn, so follow us. Last but not least, we have a podcast of our own called The Master Marketer. It's a B2B marketing podcast, so we invite listeners to check us out there. And if you're a master marketer, get in touch with us. We'd love to have you on the show. And yeah, I would say, connect with us on LinkedIn. We do share a lot and build in public a lot, so there's a lot of good stuff there.
The only thing I would add to that is we have a live show as well. It's currently being rebranded and redone slightly, so it's on very minor hiatus, if you will. I shouldn't call it hiatus. So the show is going to be called Relationship-Led Growth Live, based on our category, and check that out. We should be relaunching in the next couple of weeks here. So
awesome. I love it. Well, Gaby, Mike, thank you for being on the show. Thank you for being our first tandem duo couple on Agency Life. I really appreciate the conversation. I've enjoyed every conversation, whether it's been on LinkedIn in the comments section or live with either of you. I'm glad we got to share it with more of the audience today. So thank you so very much.